All right, so for the last component of this afternoon, we are going to have a panel with some esteemed researchers. I will let them introduce themselves. And this is great because our goal is to provide interesting, actionable steps that hopefully guide you on in your cybersecurity careers. So with no further ado, we have Kinga, Luke, and Mikey. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves because I want to see how you guys introduce y'all. So Mikey.
Yeah, I'm Mikey. Work in macOS Instant Response, and when I started out in this industry, I did offensive security as my undergrad. So this is basically all I've ever done, and I only do macOS stuff. So I know a little bit about Linux, and then I know nothing about Windows. So this is what I've done primarily for like 10 years now, maybe a bit more than that.
OG status.
Yeah. No.
Luke.
Okay, you've already heard a bit about me, but yeah, mostly, not mostly anymore. I guess I split offensive, defensive kind of view on things. Similar to Mikey, I left uni straight in security. I did a bit of Windows first. I know, I'm sorry. But there's a lot of people doing Windows security, and they've got really good at it. So
True.
Just the level that folks are at is kind of mental. So at the time, very few people were looking at Mac, and it was maybe an easier bridge to get into to find cool stuff. So
yeah. Kinga?
I'm Kinga, and I feel like I've covered my background in my talk a bit as well. So unlike the guys here, my actual day job is more around security architecture. So it's not kind of Mac OS specific. So for me, it's more maybe academic and like hobbyist. So maybe I can provide a different perspective to you guys. But yeah, I work mainly in security architecture and security operations mostly, and look at macOS and iOS forensics after hours.
Awesome. And to, build trust with Luke, I also started with Windows. So I was giving him grief, but yeah, so I studied standard computer science. When I was in uni, as we say in the UK, there was no such thing as a cybersecurity courses. So I'm like jealous of y'all that you're like able to study cybersecurity degrees. Like that's super cool. So that's really cool to see that as an option today. After uni, I did an internship at NASA, which was super cool, but wow, I was definitely the dumbest person there. And I quickly realized that rocket science was not my forte. And it was a lot of like code reviews and like proofs and formal stuff, which is very important when you're sending stuff into space, but also kind of boring. So then I was hired by the National Security Agency. I started doing malware analysis on the defensive side of the house, which is actually super cool. I was able to reverse engineer samples used in significant DoD intrusions. DoD is the Department of Defense, basically US government military networks. So looking at, Russian 0 days, Chinese implants. And so I was able to kind of cut my teeth on that, but it was all Windows. That was, the thing at the time. I then jumped to the other side of the house doing offensive cyber capabilities. Super, super fun. Fortunately, can't say too much about that. And then when I left, I very randomly and in retrospect, very luckily, got into Mac OS. It's probably, 2008. So back in the day. And the only reason I got into macOS was not because it was popular or I thought it was going to like blow up. It's just that like I wanted to use my foundational skills that I had honed at the NSA, reverse engineering, vulnerability discovery, without using the same techniques or focusing on the same targets as the NSA, because most of that work was classified. So I said, oh, well, macOS looks interesting. And I bought my first MacBook from a random dude in a parking lot because it was Craigslist. Might have fallen off a truck. I couldn't afford like a real, like a one from the store, I guess. But anyways, that's how I got into Mac. And since then, I've been, I guess I drank the apple juice, and I've never looked back. And so, in retrospect, it was a great decision. But yeah, so today, I have a bunch of questions I'm going to ask the panelists and answer myself. And the goal is really for us to share our journeys into cybersecurity, the things that really helped us go from students into landing jobs. And then once we were in the cybersecurity space, things we could do that helped us thrive. And so, hopefully this is pretty informal, interesting, but also practical for many of you who are just starting out. So the first question I'm just going to ask, and y'all can order in any order you decide, maybe arm wrestle or something. What was the single most helpful thing you did early on that really kind of either got your foot in the door or piqued your interest? Was it a capture the flag event? Was it open source development? Was it just your degree in uni? Was it building a home computer system? Was it a cert that you were going after? It doesn't have to be Mac specific, but like, what was kind of some of the first steps that looking back, you were like, I'm really glad I did that instead of just drinking with my friends all night. Not looking at you, Mikey.
All right. So mine was a CTF, actually.
Awesome.
It was in my second year of university. Facebook were running a CTF, and it was the point where I would sign up to anything and get a free T-shirt. So I did. And I knew nothing. So I spoke to my professor at the time and said, this thing is in like 3 weeks. What do I need to know in 3 weeks' time to not be absolutely useless at this? And he pointed me in a few directions, told me a few things. I read up for a couple of weeks. I'm quite competitive, which I think probably helped. And then rocked up at the Facebook thing, and me and my team of folks that similarly didn't really have a clue what was going on came second. And that kind of like the competitive nature started driving. And then from there, kind of fell into it through that, really.
Nice. I think for me, actually, it was I attended a workshop, a Python coding workshop called Django Girls. I don't know if maybe someone heard of it. So now it's like 15 years old, but I attended the very first workshop ever. I think I was 17 or 18. And basically it's a workshop during which complete beginners with no experience in tech programming whatsoever built their first blog using the Django framework and Python. So I went to that, and together with, you had to apply and stuff, and together with kind of that workshop came a free ticket for a conference called PyCon. So that was PyCon Europe in Berlin. So I went to that conference knowing a little bit of Python from high school, and I met a bunch of wonderful people, and I think I really kind of straight in got involved into the community. So they were very welcoming, and there was obviously people very experienced developers at the conference. The whole kind of idea of this diversity initiatives was quite new still, I feel. But everyone was so interested, and they came into the room, the workshop. They were very interested in what we're doing, and the format of it was such that there were a group of 3 or 4 people, and everyone had their own experienced mentor. So you kind of had this closer relationship with experienced people. So I think that was the first thing where I realized that the community is behind a lot of different domains in tech, and I really like that I got involved in organizing some of the Django Girls events while I was then at university. And while I didn't become a programmer in the end, I still really like Python, and I think that the community is not as good as macOS, but close. So yeah, that was it for me.
I think similar to Kinga, I had a community angle where I did my undergrad at Abertay, and they have a hacking society, and every year for the last 15 years they run a conference. And when I first got there, it was maybe the year 3, but I think it was Glenn Wilkinson, a guy that used to work at SensePost, which is this pen testing shop in South Africa, but they're the research they do is insane. And this is way back in 2013. And Glenn Wilkinson came and presented on this thing he'd built called Snoopy NG. And it was about how you could track populations across a city, for example, via Wi-Fi beaconing and Bluetooth beaconing. This was 15 years ago nearly, before we had rotating Bluetooth addresses, rotating Wi-Fi MAC addresses. And that sort of tracking is the reason why that all exists now. And that just really blew me away. And I was fuck, there's real real tangible stuff you can do with this hacking and cyber stuff. It isn't just breaking into some website and dumping people's personal details. who cares about that? Like if you can track people in the real world, that's way more interesting. And then off the back of that, went to more conferences, and you meet people in person, and it becomes way easier to approach them online and ask for help. And then eventually I started presenting at conferences, and like presenting at a conference is a great way to make sure you master something, because there is nothing worse than getting up in front of a room full of people and looking like an idiot if you're totally wrong. So it really ingratiates into you, like, I need to know what I'm talking about back to front, or I'm going to make myself look like an idiot in front of, good people like yourselves.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it seems like the community is always an important component. And then also for all of you, it seems like, finding the activity it was like really piqued your curiosity and your interest. And I think that's what I remember. I think the first experience I had with hacking, however you want to define that. So in high school, we had TI-83 calculators, and you could program them with Visual Basic, no, or just Basic. And like, that was mind blowing to me. I was like, you could program things. And I remember it was like Calc 2, AP, something, and math is not my forte. And spring break, there was going to be a big exam after spring break. So we had all the time to study spring break. And I remember thinking, like, I'm going to code the formulas into my calculator and write a program that basically you give it the equation and it like spits out the answer for you. So, I'm gonna get an A on this exam. But I knew my teacher would check the calculators at the beginning of the class, and if there's programs on them, he would run them and see what they did. So I said, well, I'm gonna be sneaky, and it's like, I'm gonna write a little program that calculates the digits of pi. You say digit 10 and it tells you it's a 6 or whatever it is. But if you put in a special code, it like opens this like backdoor menu with the stuff. And so I spent all this time spring break coding this and implementing all the formulas and testing and debugging. And I really didn't know how to program. So like, it took me a long time. But anyways, by the end, I had this great program. Exam time came around. Teacher checked the calculators, ran my program, didn't find the back door. But the funny thing was that I learned so much coding the formulas and learning how to program. I actually didn't need to cheat, and I didn't actually end up using the program to validate my answers because I actually knew it so well. And so even young, naive Patrick was like, okay, wow, this is something I really enjoy doing. And there's kind of a rush, when you get the program to execute correctly, throw in a little bit of like backdoors hacking, trying not to get caught, coupled with the fact that you actually fundamentally gain such a deep understanding, which to me at the time was super intriguing. I was just hooked. And so I think similar to y'all, it's like finding something where, it really resonates with you is great, because I meet people all the time and they're like, Patrick, tech sounds awesome. Like, you get to do all these cool travels and it pays well and job security. Like, I want to get into it. And I'm like, don't get me wrong, it's a great career, but like, you got to love it, because, most of the day you're sitting in front of a computer reading documents and debugging code, and like, it's frustrating. And if you don't like enjoy that, like, good luck. So, word of advice. All right, so next question, skill gaps. What do you wish entry-level applicants knew coming in, or maybe things that you see the younger generation could maybe, how do I say this? Like, are there any like skill gaps, or like, hey, it'd be great if you focus more on this, or, hey, they're not teaching this as much, vice versa. So, coming in, they would be just better prepared for what currently the industry is looking for, or, once they're in, that they will, thrive.
Yeah, so I actually have a lot of thoughts about this, but this is maybe a bit more general security. But so I've also graduated with a cybersecurity degree a few years ago, and well, I enjoyed it immensely, and it was great to meet other people, who were also into security, and we would go to conferences together and stuff. The longer I actually work in the industry, the more I realize how little I actually learned at university, or maybe how little is the wrong way to put it, but like how the things that I've learned are not really that applicable to what I'm doing. And I'm quite a generalist in my security career. So I've done like, kind of internal security at different SaaS companies. Now I do security architecture. I do a bit of forensics. So, it's like I've done a few different things, but like, I feel especially those, it depends on the university, depends what sort of courses you're doing, but I feel like that university provides you with like maybe very specific skills in a few niches, but at least the university I went to was quite random in what the niches were. So we had like a pen testing module and we had a networking module, and that was kind of it. Like there was a digital forensics one, but like there wasn't really something that would pull it all together to like understand security as a whole. And then I believe that, you know, you graduate, you go into the world of work, and a lot of the time, obviously, depends what path you take, but you will have to still speak on kind of general level about security. Like you have to a lot of the time justify the need for it and be able to speak in maybe business terms or just in kind of regular person terms about why it's important and why you're doing this. So I feel like that gap can be probably you know, like filled with exactly like community events and like your own research and you know, meeting people doing all sorts of work and roles in security, just so that you can appreciate that there's a lot of different, you know, domains and a lot of different kind of priorities even in security itself. So I think that kind of general appreciation of the whole ecosystem is what I was really lacking.
Yeah, I mean, I have a kind of similar experience where, because my undergrad was ethical hacking, like we did one module called like computer architecture, computer hardware and architecture. So we had to spend like a huge amount of our own time then learning like operating system fundamentals and like networking fundamentals. And I think now I see like a bit of that missing when folk come up. Like there's now like a lot of tooling that makes our lives way easier, but like in the beginning, like you have to understand what the tool is doing. Like especially like if you go work in a company and like they didn't use that particular tool, and you know you kind of get permission to then just run arbitrary tools, right? You kind of have to know what's going on at like a fairly like fundamental level, and it varies, right? Like you didn't necessarily have to know like assembly, but understanding like the core of how networking works and like how, I mean, I do incident response as well. So I've always done incident response. So we spend most of our time trying to work out what is normal versus what is abnormal. So to do that, you have to have a really like solid understanding of what normal looks like in the context of the operating system on a day-to-day basis anyway. But I think the networking one really as well, like everyone, or at least I think a lot of people now are like, we have TLS almost everywhere. So like there's no point ever looking at Wireshark. But in a real company, there's going to be hundreds of other protocols in use that, you know, when an attacker gets into your Confluence and finds creds for RDP or like some other IPMI or like some other baseband, you know, management access thing, that you're probably then going to want to crack that out in Wireshark and look at, you know, how many bytes have been transferred back. Like, does that look like a successful authentication, that sort of stuff. So I would really just nail that down before you get into like all of the security stuff, because you're not going to succeed in security unless you have a real good grasp of the fundamentals there.
Operating system internals is probably the only class I still remember from uni. And remember's a bit of a stretch, but the I would say I use. So like massively agree with like both of you on that. I guess I don't want to just say the same thing, so I'll maybe offer a slightly different point. When we hire for junior roles, it obviously helps to have a technical background, to have technical knowledge, but we're not as worried about what you know now. It's about what we think you can know in the future. And great ways to demonstrate this are being curious, learning things yourself, and having passion. So like turning up to events like this, like if somebody told me in an interview that they came to something like this and all the things they learned, and maybe there was this one talk that really resonated with them, like super good. That's like tons of points, right? Yeah. Like one of the best folks I know that kind of came up at the same time as me, who's now the technical league for Cobalt Strike, so like done very well in his kind of career, came from a physics degree and was just like, computers are cool. I guess I like maths and physics and stuff. And then he learned everything. So had like no kind of background in it, and he is an absolute weapon. So
no, I love those answers, and I wouldn't change any of them. I mean, I think exactly the keys, just to I guess highlight a little bit more, I think the foundations are so important. I remember when I got recruited by the NSA, the two questions were, do you have a technical degree and can you pass the polygraph test? They literally did not care what you knew because what they were doing was not taught in universities. And they said, look, once we get the right people who are inquisitive, curious, and can pass the polygraph test, we can, hone them and give them the skills. And I never forgot that. The other question they asked me is, have I cracked games before? And I was like, if I say yes, like, you're the government, like, that's not legal. They're like, no, like, for reverse engineering. I was like, T-gens, like, crack me's? And they're like, okay. But yeah, I think the foundations are super key. I remember in my university, and this is again, early 2000s, like, there was like one assembly class, and I was a strange kid. I really like low-level stuff. And I took that, and I took the compiler class. And there's like hardly anyone in that class. Those are two of the classes that I think had the biggest impact in terms of giving me the tools to be a successful cybersecurity researcher, because reverse engineering, looking for vulnerabilities, you're going to be looking at like compiler code, and you're going to be reading assembly. So don't be scared of the low level stuff. I think especially today, it's like vibe coding and like web tech stuff. Sure, that stuff's all cool, but under the hood, that all gets run still by computers that are running CPUs. And so an understanding of that is super, super important. The other thing I remember, I took a public speaking class, and it was like in the business school. And so I had to like walk across all the way across the university, and I got like a B, and I was like bummed, but I was like not a good public speaker. But it gave me some good tools. And so just to add to what I think, what many of the panelists said, also being well-rounded. It's great if you're technically competent. That's, I think, a must-have. But if you're able to articulate your ideas well in blog posts and conference talks, that's what's going to separate you from the rest of the applicants. But I really like what Luke said too. It's when we're hiring, it's, yes, what you know is important, but it's really more important like your curiosity and your potential for learning. That's a little hard to like capture, but I think showing you've taken initiative outside your courses is one huge way. You're like, look, I have a personal blog. One story I was telling some students earlier, at the first OBTS, there was this college student named Stuart who showed up, and he paid for his own way. And I had kind of knew who he was because he had retweeted some of my stuff. And I met and I chatted with him, and I was just like so impressed because there's like 50 people that showed up to OBTS 1.0. And I was like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I want to learn more about Macs, and like I'm in college and I'm trying to figure out stuff. And I have this blog where I like follow some of the stuff you do, try to reverse engineer. And I was like, this guy's got drive, initiative, a love of learning. Fast forward a few years at Jamf, we were looking to hire juniors, a junior Mac reverser. Yeah, true story. And we had tons of applicants, and I was like, no, we're going to hire Stuart. And Stuart came in, and he had, done some trainings at OBTS. He was a great self-learner, even though some of the other applicants had more experience. But Stuart just came in and crushed it. He was super appreciative for the opportunity. He was a go-getter, super motivated, super curious, amazing. Moved up super fast in Jamf, got poached by Huntress, and now is like one of their top Mac security researchers, product development. So all kudos to him, but I think just his curiosity, his interest in learning, his self-initiative were huge green flags. And when we hired him, he just crushed it. So I think those are things that employers look for too. And so some of these soft skills I think are really important too. That looking back, I wish I would have developed more in university instead of just taking the hardcore technical classes. Even though sometimes we think we're just rated or graded on our technical competence, having those other skills, especially in today's age where cybersecurity companies want conference speakers and they want blog posts and they want social media content, brand awareness, they very heavily lean on their technical minded individuals. And so if you have those other soft skills, huge green flag.
I mean, I'll just add to that. Like, I think in my experience, the biggest indicator of success I've ever seen is interest, and like that can be as specific as like Luke used to work with some folks who only pen test supercomputers, only pen test mainframes. So like they love pen testing, but only supercomputers. So even if it's like that specific, as long as you find something that you're interested in. Like, in your day-to-day job, you're going to have to do stuff that you aren't interested in. But if you have like a niche, something to focus on, like that's always the interest is the biggest indicator I've ever seen of success. And just add to the soft skills thing, 100%. Like, again, I work in IR, so like we spend all of our time communicating just what the current state of the chaos is. And if you aren't able to strongly and clearly communicate to my teammates, like I work in a team where we have a team in Singapore, team in London, and a team in America. So we transition from Singapore in the morning to us, and then we transition in the evening from ourselves to our American colleagues. So if you can imagine working an incident where there's like 20 up to 20 different people involved, where we have to communicate the state of play across those two boundaries in the morning and the evening. And if you fall down there, it doesn't really matter what work you achieved in the day, because if the team doesn't know about that or has to revalidate that because you've been ambiguous or poorly communicated that, then there isn't really the work doesn't matter then if they have to redo it, or it actually leads to more confusion. So the soft skills thing, I can't bang on about that enough.
That's a great example. Super applicable. And it's like you said, like the technical skills are important, but they're not if you can't effectively communicate. So that's good. Kind of leads to the next question. Oftentimes when companies are looking to hire individuals, they look at their activities outside perhaps their university or their current jobs. And, so what do you think is like a project that a student could build, say in a few months, that would help him or her stand out and also, kind of illustrate their curiosity, their self-motivation? Any ideas, suggestions, things you've seen?
I would disagree with what you said earlier. I'd build a loader. If you wanted to do like low-level Mac OS stuff like malware reversing, understanding like OS internals, the first thing to do is go learn enough C where you could build a simple loader to load a hello world into memory, and you will learn infinitely more doing that one project than you will if you go and read. You should still read blog posts, but just doing that one project to write a loader, you will learn an insane amount about the operating system and the various aspects of low level interaction.
Yeah, what is it? Do as I say, not as I do. I'm just lazy. I'm like, I don't want to write my own loader. But to Mikey's point, that's a great example of a project that I think is kind of fun, but also really helps you uncover internals, kind of like Luke was saying too, of low-level knowledge. And I mean, if someone applied to like work with us and they had written like a Mako loader, I'd be like, damn, like increasing your salary. Anyways, Luke, Kinga, thoughts on projects or ideas that you've either done yourself or seen students do that would be like, wow, this is awesome?
I think building a little bit on what Mikey said before as well, that I'm not sure about like a specific project to build, but like if you can show that you have an interest in like a specific technology and like you really like, obviously maybe you can't become a subject matter expert in a couple of months, but that you've really like taken the time to understand it from the ground up and you really understand how it works. Like I think that's good in and of itself. So like I'm not sure really the type of job that I have, you wouldn't really be building things to get it. I think you would more like try and understand it rather than build things yourself. But yeah, I think just because I think that if you find like your niche, let's say, or like your tech that you're interested in, if you focus on this, you're not only kind of showing that you can understand it, but you're kind of showing almost a bit of like management skills, like that you can manage yourself enough to organize your own kind of journey into the learning that one thing. So I always think that that's quite admirable when you see that someone just takes an interest in one thing and just really dives into it. So maybe, for example, you do that and then you want to give a talk at your local meetup or something like this, and I think that would be a cool thing to see.
Yeah, I think like same as Kinga, like it really depends what you're interested in. If you're into vulnerability research, go and find somebody that's really well explained a vulnerability that you can understand. Redo it yourself, like rewrite the code, see how it works, poke it with the debugger and things like that. And then maybe there's other things that have the same vulnerability, like actually no, this is what I'm going to say. Yeah, variant analysis. So some bugs that I've found in like macOS and things like this come from reading somebody else's blog post, understanding the technique, and then going, I wonder if there's any other things on the operating system that have this same vulnerability. And you can literally, like, if you understand it, you can take exactly what they've done, point it in a different direction, and bug bounties fall out. So if you're into the vulnerability space, I would say variant analysis on stuff is a great way to kind of demonstrate in a great project you can kind of pick up in a couple of months.
Actually, I just wanted to add that I think what transpires from what we all three of us said, that like even just documenting your journey, right? So like if you want to write a blog and even just writing about what you're learning, like it will show a lot, right? It will show your dedication, but also communication and all those other skills. So I think that starting with a blog is always good.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just to build on that, I think it illustrates a few things. One, it's going to help with those soft skills of writing, which we said is super important, because at your job, you're probably going to be expected in some capacity to generate documentation, blog posts. And so that's super good. I also like what you said. It kind of illustrates some management, right? If you start a project and finish it on your own, like that's a green flag. That shows that you have some persistence and some discipline. And I also like, Kinga, that you mentioned, just documenting your journey. I remember when I started doing malware analysis, like I knew I was intrigued by malware, but like didn't really know a lot. And I remember there was this blog post on Blaster. It was like this 90-page PDF, and I basically got the binary and like step by step and kind of jotted notes and stuff. And so like that wasn't even a project of building something. It was just something that allowed me to hone my interest. But yeah, I think like anything you're creating that's tangible, that you can point to and showing, look, I'm so passionate about this. I've done this outside my course load and my job. Like that's like big green flags. Blogging, posting stuff on GitHub, anything like that just shows extra initiative. I like we said, talking at your local meetups. Like, I mean, I rarely encounter applicants that have done that. And when I have, for example, someone like Stuart, it's just like, it's such a breath of fresh air, and that person is going to crush it. And then a lot of doors are opened because of that self-initiative.
Oh, yeah, just to add to the blog post thing, I think now as well, like it's super, like GitHub pages, not to big up GitHub too much, but GitHub pages, like you don't need any infrastructure, and you can just have like a really simple like rendered markdown like that. Like I always used to think the idea of having a blog was kind of like pretentious and like self-interested, but when you understand something and then go to actually write it down, and thinking about writing is a really good way to actually process information to make sure that you really understand it. And then I've ended up writing blog posts that are just like notes to myself. Like one time I think I wrote a blog post that was about how to set up Tailscale with Pi-hole, and that was because two of my other mates had asked me about it. And like, I'm not going to send people raw markdown files, put it on GitHub pages, easy, and then that's just like a note to yourself in perpetuity of how to do something if you're not into like the whole Obsidian and all these like insane note management apps we have now. But yeah, great way to like get noticed on the CV. But just thinking to write is like that's real thinking. To think about something to then write it down is one of the best ways to then process information.
Because that's what you were saying at the start, like standing up in front of people or writing something down and showing it to a bunch of people. You don't want to look like an idiot, so you're probably going to really put in the time to understand what you're writing about.
Yeah.
Awesome. So next question, kind of reality check. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions students might have about Apple security jobs, if any?
I think probably the first one would be that there's not a lot of them. The market is pretty huge. I mean, I think someone was mentioning earlier how much more in use they are in the enterprise, right? And it's like, it's kind of similar to, if you go back a few years, at least I would conceptually say it's kind of similar to the transition we went through from on-prem to cloud, right? Like there are companies that had to just hire whole new people to do AWS security, to do Azure security, because the folks they had were used to running like co-located stuff in data centers, and like it's a whole different dimension. So like I think similar to what Luke was saying earlier, one of the reasons I got into macOS is because every like blog post, like every like conference talk, security tool was like Windows and oh, we've smashed AD again, like great. And I'm like, cool. AD's been solved. Like AD is fucked, and that's that's it. But then no one was doing Mac stuff. So I think it's in use more and more in the enterprise. Like a lot of folks who are really important in companies are using Macs, like senior leadership, executive leadership. So there are definitely jobs out there.
Yeah, I think just to add to that too, and we mentioned this a few times, just like the niche and the skill sets, because there's probably maybe not as many Mac security jobs as others, because it is unfortunately currently still a bit niche. I think that's changing and there's more opportunities, but the openings I know they're looking for people with like deep knowledge. And so one of the things I always talk to students, and this has worked for me, so take it for what it's worth, is really focusing on one thing. So I remember when I was at the NSA, the internship, the way it worked is every semester I go to school for a semester and then I go work for a semester. So it was like with the university and the government. And every time I was at the NSA, I'd work at a different office. So I got a good like taste of what they were all doing. And I remember when I started, I was like, I want to be good at everything. I was like a naive college kid. And I remember literally like the first week in, I was just after interview, because you interview all these different offices. I was like, wow, there's just no way you can be good at everything. And so at that point already, I said, you know what? I think it's more important to kind of pick something and get a lot of depth. And if what you pick is relevant, whether that's reverse engineering Mac malware, developing Mac security tools, whatever that is, I think find something you love and stick to that. And then you will pretty quickly become, I don't know if the expert, but a expert. So for example, a few of the talks mentioned, for example, endpoint security. It's a new framework, newish framework. It's what all the security tools are built on. I'm supposed to be an expert on Mac's endpoint security. I literally put 2 chapters in a book about it. Luke works at a company where they use it all the time. Him and I are constantly like, oh, didn't think about that before. Why? Yeah. And to the point, like at DEF CON, I'm giving a talk on kind of the nuances of endpoint security, because there's this super powerful framework that everyone should be using, that few people are, that still has all these corners that like no one's poked in. And these corners like bite if you get it wrong. I can personally attest to that. Block. And my point is, picking something like that, if you're like really good at Mac security and really good, even more specifically at like writing security tools, endpoint security, and you show up, I know several companies that immediately would be like super impressed by that and be like, wow, this is exactly the kind of people we are looking for. So I still think there's a lot of niches in Mac security. And I think Mikey kind of mentioned this. It's still kind of new, so it's actually great. I would not want to be giving security talks about Windows stuff because the bar is so high. It's kind of like all been done. Whereas on Mac, it's like endpoint security, perfect example. Like I can give a talk at DEF CON just because like nobody else has done it yet. And it's a relevant topic that people haven't dove into. So I think, finding a niche within, Apple security space. Apple security is already a niche, but then I think finding there's areas within that really call you, like dive into that. And then, if you find a company that, they mention that specifically on their CV, they will be blown away. And so I think that's a kind of an important point to make as well.
Yeah, I think I would agree with your point about the headroom. I mean, like, when you compare it to Windows, right? Like, Windows has probably been in the enterprise for a quarter of a century, getting the 11 daylights kicked out of it, right? And probably you can say Mac OS has had that same attention for maybe like 10 years. So with respect to like the really advanced stuff we get on Windows, that's got like a 15-year head start. So there's so much headroom in macOS security research, and the rate of expansion of features, core to the operating system, but also other features is pretty ginormous, right? So it's continually moving as well. So that's always opening up more headroom for folks to look in other areas.
Awesome. Next question is kind of related. What's one Mac or iOS security topic you wish more students explored early on?
I think for maybe I'm projecting slightly, but
That's okay.
I wish I knew more about iOS as a concept. I think there's a lot of really good iOS researchers, and because of the attack surface and because of the geopolitical and Pegasus and all this kind of stuff that's going on, like the folks that are in that are super intelligent. But I see less folks coming up like having this as a specialty. Maybe the bar is higher to get in with so where you even kind of start pursuing this stuff. But I think there's probably quite a large gap there, and a bunch of room for folks to kind of fill that gap.
I would gently posit that the reason that there's a gap there is because if you can write iOS exploits and find iOS vulnerabilities, you can sell them for way more money than you get for writing a blog post. So I would say that there's probably a bit of a visibility gap between when we used to have public iOS. So I think iOS, what did we just have, 16? Yeah, what's 17 or 18. So, but that was the first version of iOS where we didn't have a public jailbreak while it was out for the first time, I think, ever. So the gap there is now that all that research, well, I would posit that research has been kept private rather than being shared publicly because it is a way more valuable commodity than it was 10 years ago.
I just wanted to add again from maybe a more generalist perspective that I think that knowing a bit about macOS security can help in getting not only the macOS security jobs. So for example, in one of my roles when I joined a company where, all the stuff we're using Macs, but they obviously were not, with a security team of like 4 or 5 people, they were not advertising for a macOS security expert to join them. It was, but it was like a very positive thing for them that I was interested in it. So I think that it's quite unique, as in like I think as we said many times that like a lot of people will have some maybe passion projects to do with maybe Linux if you're a student and you're studying something computing related, but the macOS kind of in the mainstream is not that popular. So even if you're kind of not only going for macOS specific jobs, it still can be a leg up, even if it's not advertised as such. So for example, SaaS companies they're the whole house is, a Mac shop, like they won't advertise it as such, but they will appreciate it. So you almost maybe have to explain to them why you're a valuable candidate from that perspective.
Yeah, I like that. I think I would add, I see a lot of students graduating now with a lot of good knowledge, but one thing I think that really benefits individuals in Apple security jobs is the ability to write low-level code. C, for example, Objective-C or Swift. Those have definitely have fallen out of favor in terms of mainstream. Everyone's, doing JS and vibe coding or whatever. But if you're writing security tools, you're going to be writing and interfacing with low-level components. I don't think you're going to be writing handcrafted assembly too much anymore. But a lot of, for example, endpoint security is a C API. And I remember even when I was in university, it's like they were all about Python and PHP, which are all great and have their place. But, it's rare that I see a student that comes out with competent ability to do low-level coding. And I think that's hugely beneficial because that makes you so multifaceted. I think the most valuable individuals and companies are those that can reverse engineer malware and also write security tools to detect that. And so it's kind of having that multifaceted, and they're very complementary because I basically learned how to write software by reverse engineering software in the sense I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. And kind of vice versa. So if you're reverse engineering malware and you know how to write low-level code, you'll be like, oh, this is what that disassembly is doing, and vice versa. So again, don't shy away from the low-level concepts. Take that compiler class, take that assembly class. It's not available at your university, buy an assembly book. I remember doing that and trying to understand what hexadecimal was. It took me weeks, but I was like, okay, I got it. And that really planted a lot of seeds. Yeah, Mikey.
Just to project a bit Luke, one of the things I miss from being a student or just not having a full-time job, also being unemployed is great if you financially can afford it. But the ability to just read, to have time to read whatever you want. And now, I think when I started uni in 2013, the same year we had the Snowden leaks. And I think if I'm right in remembering, it was also the same year that Mandiant published the APT1 report, which was like the first sort of like blockbuster public piece of threat intelligence about how top tier, allegedly Chinese-based computer network exploitation was being perpetrated against, you know, various targets. And like now we have just this deluge of like threat intelligence that's available for free. So it doesn't, and this will benefit you even if you're reading about Windows intrusions, right? Because one of the things that you have to sort of internalize is, even though that you love macOS security, that's just a vehicle for the actor to get into the organization, right? The actions on objectives are probably something downstream of that, of the endpoint. So when you go and read these reports about how these top tier actors are behaving, you know, beforehand, during, and then after that initial device compromise, you will learn a tremendous amount, and that will be really valuable if you go into interviews and they ask about, like, you know, tell us about some piece of news you've recently read, or like, you know, how does you know, I've been asked in interviews, you know, how does modern phishing work, and they're looking for answers about like proxy and 2FA codes, or like OAuth phishing to get past like security keys. So if you go and read extensively, even if you didn't understand it, like, I mean, I used to be into cryptography a little bit, and I would go and read these papers on TLS and like all this stuff that I maybe only understood 10% of it. But then if you keep reading this stuff for 10 years, now I understand about 50% of it. So, you know, eventually, yeah, progress, right? I mean, eventually this stuff just sinks in just by sheer exposure to it, even if you didn't understand everything immediately, right? And that's unfortunately just, you know, part of learning.
Awesome. So for the last 10 minutes or so, we want to open it up to questions from y'all. So now is the opportunity for you to ask any of us questions about, well, anything.
Just kind of want to ask about like the education side of things. Shout out to Abertay Mikey. Natalie says hi, by the way. So this is kind of the first time I think myself and some others are getting some really good education on the Mac side of security. Do you think there's a gap in higher education right now focusing too much on Windows? And if so, how do you think you can solve that?
Yeah. So the question was basically like, is there a gap in university in terms of Mac? And I would say 100%. And this to me is similar to when I went to university. There was a similar gap on cybersecurity. And it's unfortunate because in an ideal world, you would have available courses for students that mirror what is in demand in the workforce. And there's a lot of reasons why this isn't the case. You know, professors, once they have their syllabus, it's like a lot of work to change that up, yada, yada, yada. So what I've seen is it's really important for you as individuals then to take that external initiative, because solving that problem in university is very difficult and it's going to take lots of time and you're going to long be graduated by then. And so, for example, coming to this event is a great example. Really, though, taking that self-initiative, reading books. There's now a number of books on Mac, anything. Jaron's books, for example, the ones I wrote, Jonathan Levin. There's just now really good resources. And the benefit of that is, I mean, you're going to supplement essentially the gap, which is unfortunate there is a gap, but there is, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And then also it really shows, as many of us have said many times, that self-initiative. Like if I was interviewing someone and they're like, I've read Jaron's book and your book and Jonathan Levin's books, I'd be like, dude, that's awesome. Like that would hold more green flags to me than someone who's like, I took a Mac security course at university. So yeah, it's good to realize there is that gap. And this is one of the reasons we do events like Objective for the Wii and OBTS. One of the reasons I wrote the book, I was like, this is the book I wish I had. And so there is a gap, and taking kind of this self-initiative, because I think Mikey said there's the blog post and there's the information out there if you are interested in it, but unfortunately you kind of have to take that initiative, but that also then will reflect on you very well. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a gap. Yeah, what you do about that, I mean, I think Patrick's probably right. I mean, you have 4 years in Scotland as an undergrad, 3 in England. So I wouldn't recommend wasting your time and energy trying to redirect the ship that is, even at a small university like Abertay, where we both went, is tiny, probably one of the smallest universities in Scotland. And even there, trying to affect that sort of wholesale change takes a very long time. Although Jamie O'Hare, who now runs the cyber program at Abertay, Anytime I see him in the pub, he is always soliciting feedback from me. So find him at the pub, buy him a pint or get him to buy you a pint, and then keep hammering that into him that we should do macOS at Abertay or whichever uni you're from, because there's definitely a gap, 100%.
Yeah, I think there is just a gap in general for security. I think like if you're not doing a cybersecurity specific course, I think there is just this gap. Like I did no Windows on my course. It was actually all Linux. Which I don't know if that's, I don't know what everybody else is doing. And then I did Windows for the first 3 years of my career. So I think there is a disconnect from the real world, from uni in general, not necessarily just in macOS security. But something probably should change at some point.
So I also agree that there's a gap, but I feel like maybe your example as well, that you haven't done any Windows. I'm almost thinking that maybe it's not the university's job to fill all the gaps. Maybe instead of like trying to get all this practical knowledge, but obviously you can't get everything that's out there, and that was a bit my experience at university, that I got very practical knowledge in very kind of disjointed areas, in my opinion, that maybe we should focus on those foundations and really get that right. So then you are equipped with kind of general understanding that you can then apply to, for example, whatever operating system you happen to choose. So I agree that there is a gap, but I think more than one.
Yeah. So coming like from a low-level background, that it's like my thing, I'm starting to see that the protections are actually being like very competent. So in 5 or 6 years ago, you maybe needed 1 0 day, 2 0 days. Now you, for the same thing, to achieve the same thing, you now need 6. We'll need maybe 12 in some years. So do you think pursuing a career in low-level security, Apple stuff like Pound, like the classical Pound CTF challenges, it's a good career nowadays? It's not?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. It's definitely going to get more difficult. I got a lot of mates that do vulnerability research, exploit development, and you're totally right. Like the number of bugs you now need to chain to get privileged code execution is going up. But with that complexity, we're going to need more folks who go and work at Microsoft, who go work at Apple to build the next generation of these defenses, and then there will be. There'll be jobs in Gov, there'll be jobs working for consultancies who do vulnerability research and exploit development as a service for various clients of varying moral authority. So I think those jobs are, if anything, probably going to be more in demand. There's always going to be attack and defend. Like it's just it's going to shift what exactly it looks like, but it's always going to be there because we're computerizing more stuff, and by that very expansion, there's going to be more people interested in getting at that information or controlling those systems. So I don't see cybersecurity going away or low level stuff going away. If anything, probably increasing in demand as complexity rises.
And increasing in value too, because I'm not sure what the price of a Safari 0 day from like 10 years ago to now is, but I bet it's significantly changed. Right. So even if it takes you 10 times as long to work through the defenses to get that point, then if the payout and the value to that is 10 times more, then I feel like it's all going to be kind of proportional. So yeah, as Mikey said, I think it's absolutely going to stick around. It might be harder to get into, but I think it'll always be there.
Just to add to that as well, I mean, one way to think about it, right, is like now if you say you need eight bugs with 8 exploits, the number of jobs increases then, because then you have people who will subspecialize even within that. So I've got friends of mine who only look at like Qualcomm basebands, for example. So in their team that has to produce a full remote, they just have a person who is the Qualcomm remote code execution baseband person, and then they have someone who's an expert on escalation of privilege vulnerabilities on the particular AP. So to find a chain where 10 years ago maybe one pair, like Ian Beer and like some of the Project Zero folks like 10 years ago, right? They were just cranking out like full remotes, like one person in like a weekend or whatever mad stuff they did. And now when you go and look at these like professional shops, of which we have several in the UK that are doing this sort of stuff as a service, they have teams of people who work on these remotes for these specific application processor and baseband chip pairings. So that is creating more jobs effectively, right?
I just wanted to add that kind of from the outsider perspective, when it comes to things like this, I feel like expert knowledge and researchers are here, and then the public, and meaning companies who are users or all these products are down there and working for a company which employs over 60,000 people and has a lot of infrastructure. You can imagine, like, there are things that we are talking about as if they are solved, and they are not solved. Like, think of anything and it's not solved and it's not obvious, and despite being a known vulnerabilities and things that we know are bad, like there's much more to fixing things than just knowing that it's broken. Like, there are so many like business reasons and practical reasons and legacy reasons why things cannot be fixed, that I think that whether the vulnerabilities are known is just one part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really kind of, to your previous question about like things that I probably wished I knew as a student before you got into the industry is like, yeah, like most places, like I got a lot of friends who work in incident response, like consulting, and like most places are getting of any reasonable size, like a 60,000 person company, like these places are not having a good time, like quarter to quarter, right? There's so much, period. Okay, yeah, period. Like there's so much legacy stuff, and we might think security is the be all and end all, right? But if you work at a company who is turning $1 billion in profit every quarter, and you're like, oh, could we just shut down our whole web store that in that 5-hour period, we're going to lose out on $100 million of revenue? Oh, why? Oh, there's a vulnerable version of some Apache Struts library running, and we might get hacked at some point, maybe. And they're like, okay, yeah, versus $100 million, we'll take the 100 large, right? So the idea, I think, that at least I got when I was doing my undergrad was like, there's a vulnerability and we'll just patch it, and then we can move on to like the next thing and solve all the really hard challenges. Like in the real world, every organization is struggling with their own unique version of like phishing, or like, why haven't we patched this part of prod that no one's rebooted in like 5 years? So there's just crazy stuff you're going to come across, and you just have to learn to accept that like nothing is perfect. Rarely ever do you get to see anything, even brand new stuff, stood up in a perfect state. Like stuff is going live in prod because it's going to generate revenue, and it's not the most secure version, but like we did our best, and it's in a way better state than when we first got involved with this thing. And you just have to learn to accept that. Like, yeah, we're not patching everything.
All right, we have time for one more quick question.
Yeah. I just wanted to know, in your opinion, what makes a blog truly good, and what content is the best to publish, like CTF write-ups, projects, research things, etc.
Yeah, so at least for me, ideally, the best content is content that I would find interesting, meaning I write about things I like. And I think that's important because writing a blog takes a lot of work, especially if you want to do it consistently. So if you're trying to do like what's trendy and other people will like, you'll burn out quickly. So I think find something that you're passionate about. And if you consistently publish cool stuff, especially if it has some in-depth technical content, ideally that's something new and not covered before. So like when I started blogging about Mac malware, there just like wasn't a consistent blog. And like one thing that made mine different, I always provided the sample for people to play along with, and like super basic, but then people are like, oh, cool, I read Patrick's blog because that's where I got the sample. And so finding something that's a little different and a little niche is super cool. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is something that you enjoy writing about. And again, hopefully, ideally, that's something relevant to, potential companies who are hiring and stuff like that. But, being true to yourself, as cliche as that sound, I think is really important. One more answer.
Oh, okay. Okay, I would say reproducibility. That's one of the best things about Patrick's blog, is that the whole thing is reproducible. Like, he gives you great screenshots, like the exact commands he ran, so you can go back through that and reproduce it yourself. And the like capacity to learn, because you can reproduce it, is such a huge force multiplier. So reproducibility and if you're in a position to share in the indicators, there's nothing worse than reading a blog post on malware without hashes or IP addresses or URLs, and also put them in the bottom in a code box so we can copy and paste them nicely instead of, yeah, no screenshots, no screenshots.
Sure.
Yeah, nice. Okay. So mine would be write down things that didn't work as well as the stuff that did work, especially in the offensive security tool building space. Like, people build off each other's work all the time. So if you've clearly documented, I tried 9 things and the 10th one worked, that's fantastic for everybody else that reads that, because they don't need to build on it by trying the 9 things that you already know don't work.
And it makes us all feel better, because then we know when we try 10 times and then it works the 11th time, we're not the only ones. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that it was kind of mentioned, but just if you build on existing research, and when you read something else and maybe you identify a gap or some scenario that wasn't covered by something you saw, I think that's quite cool, because you kind of add to an existing body of knowledge, and you can also kind of make some do some networking and maybe reach out to the person who did some of that research and get some more information and kind of collaborate. So I think that I do like those kind of posts.
Yeah, when you write a blog post and you use other people's work, you have to cite it. If you don't cite the
Yes.
prior art, bad things will happen to you at some point. It is the worst thing that you can ever do, is not cite the prior art.
That's totally true. And it's something where you're like, you feel maybe like if you cite it, it takes away from your blog, or you want more credit for your research. But no, it's kind of the opposite, where you will get like really ostracized, banished if someone, the worst thing is someone tweets this and be like, hey, well, someone else, you're basically copying someone else. Like, that's really hard to bounce back from. So, and the opposite is actually true. If you cite someone's work, like, they love that. They will retweet your stuff. And even if, it's like the loader stuff, someone like added the additional Objective-C code stuff. I was like, this is awesome. I then want to, thank him for the additional work. It makes the proof of concept better. So yeah, focus on community vibes, citing other people, and your research. Everyone will appreciate it, and it'll increase the dissemination, stuff like that. So that's something I really recommend. So, all right, unfortunately, timing wise, we got to wrap this up. We'll all be hanging out at happy hour. So I know some of you have additional questions. Please come and chat with us, but round of applause for Mikey, Luke, and Kinga.